When we talk about drugs and human trafficking, are you in the know? Do you know, for example, who the plug is? Are you familiar with the term parachuting? Do you know what plugging is? Do you really know what that small coffee spoon that used to get at McDonald's to stir your coffee was really used for in the drug world? And how about those fake roses that are sitting at the counter in the convenience store? Are there just a lot of romantic people that go to convenience stores? Why are they always there for sale? What's wax? Do you know what fish scale or dog food is in the drug world? How about subs or footballs or loud? How about how much it costs to buy heroin or Fetty? Do you even know what Fetty is? Well, you better stick around so I can take you to school on drugs. You know the why human trafficking work is needed: to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. This is an important episode because in this episode we're going to talk about drugs and human trafficking. We're going to lean heavily into sex trafficking and drug use because that's what I know most about. But we're also going to touch on labor trafficking and drugs, particularly drugs and labor exploitation. We're going to focus on the view from the street, from the actual people that use drugs, and not the fancy books that tell you about drugs. So this is an episode you don't want to miss. Also, email me at Celia, C-E-L-I-A, at CeliaWilliamson.com. And let me know what you want to know about, what types of episodes I should be presenting, or types of guests or names of guests that you know that I should have on the show. And also leave me a review where you listen to your podcast. I've been involved in my state as an epidemiologist, which is basically a fancy word for somebody who studies an epidemic. And I've been studying drug addiction and drug abuse for 10 years. So I've talked to about 40 to 50 drug users, 10 treatment providers, and law enforcement every 6 months for the past 10 years. So I'm really in the know in terms of who's involved in street drugs and what's happening from the street. So I'm going to tell you about each drug, probably about 14 of them, their street names, the cost to purchase the drug typically, common ways that people use the drugs, what the drugs are cut with or mixed with, the typical user, if there's one or two typical users, what drug users like to combine together when they use the drugs, and how that drug might be connected to trafficking. Now, why is this important? Because drugs and trafficking intertwine. Whether it's the chicken or the egg, it depends on the individual circumstance. So sometimes traffickers or recruiters will get vulnerable people, victims, addicted to drugs and then control them that way. A lot of times, victims and survivors will begin to use drugs to cope with the trauma that they've experienced. Either way, drugs and trafficking go hand in hand. And so we have to have a good working knowledge of drugs and some of the street names so that we can understand what's happening when people are talking to us, and we can communicate with people who may have been on drugs or may be on drugs. So I want to start with an old favorite, powder cocaine. That's been around forever. And it's still, if you had to rank that 0, we can't find that drug anywhere, or 10, we can find that drug everywhere. That's still very much a 10. But most of the time, you have to know people that deal in powder cocaine. It's very difficult to just walk up to somebody on the street and ask them if they know where to get powder cocaine or if they'll sell you powder cocaine. But it's a pretty consistent drug. It costs maybe $60 to $80 for a gram, and that's really the common amount that's purchased, is typically a gram. A teener might cost anywhere from $100 to $120, an 8-ball a little bit more, maybe $180, a half an ounce maybe $200, and an ounce $300 to $500. Now these prices, of course, as I'm giving it to you, is they're going to vary. It's not going to be the same if you purchased it in Macon, Georgia, or Birmingham, Alabama, as you would if you purchased it in Los Angeles or New York City. So just so that you get an idea, kind of the prices and how they can range from a gram to an ounce. Some of the street names for powder cocaine. Traditionally, it's called powder, blow, girl, soft. A powder cocaine is soft. Crack cocaine is known as hard. Other names have been bitch, booger sugar, that's a funny one, fish scale, because it can look crystally, almost like a fish scale. Nose candy, because most people snort powder cocaine. Salt, snort, skiing, because usually your nose is going up the line to when you snort powder cocaine. Susie Q, white lady, white girl, yayo, Christina Aguilera. And so the most common way to use powder cocaine is to snort it. It's very rare that somebody will shoot it, but people who do shoot powder cocaine are known as shooters. They shoot everything, and powder cocaine typically isn't their drug of choice. So when we talk about shooters, we're really talking about people who their primary drug of choice is typically heroin. But they'll use powder cocaine, they'll use other drugs, but heroin is their drug of choice. And if they use it intravenously, then they're known as a shooter. Some of the cuts, powder cocaine, things that they mix it with, well, powder cocaine, of course, is white powder. And one of the top cutting agents that you use with powder cocaine is baking soda. So dealers will put an amount of baking soda in with the powder cocaine to stretch the product to make more money. Of course, nowadays, dealers also put Similac. They'll put other ingredients that don't get you high. But one current phenomenon is fentanyl. A lot of fentanyl is being put in a lot of drugs. You'll hear me say that throughout this, that fentanyl is included as a mixture in a lot of drugs as a cut. The typical user of powder cocaine is somebody that wants to stay up. Powder cocaine is an upper. So you want to stay up. Maybe you're going out to the club. It's a very social drug. So drinkers will use powder cocaine. People that want to get things done, because powder cocaine brings you up. It focuses you. You think you can get a lot of things done. And it's used in combination typically with heroin. Now, if one of your primary drugs of choice is powder cocaine, you're typically not going to use it with heroin. But heroin users will use powder cocaine along with their heroin. Other combinations might be prescription opiates, particularly Percocets, sleeping pills, Xanax, marijuana, because weed basically goes with everything. It is known as the garnish of life, is what some of the users say. It's just the condiment. Now, when drug users use them together, when they use an upper and a downer, again, speedballing. So people who use heroin will typically use powder cocaine or some form of upper if they want to speedball. Now, what's the connection to trafficking? Drugs are used to trap someone in general, but also victims may use it to numb out, again, to cover up their problems, to temporarily sort of hide their problems and feel better. Strippers are known to use powder cocaine so that they give themselves the motivation to get up on the stage. Customers who can afford it, traffickers who can afford it, will use powder cocaine. And powder cocaine doesn't have the stigma of some of these other drugs. Now we look at crack cocaine. Crack cocaine is a derivative of powder cocaine. It's just been rocked up. And the ranking for crack cocaine in the U.S. is still very much a 10. It's very available. It hasn't really changed since the 80s. But crack cocaine, again, an upper. So meth is really giving crack cocaine some competition. But crack cocaine, unlike powder cocaine, isn't really a social drug. If you are addicted to crack cocaine, you really want to steal away and smoke crack cocaine all day. The epidemic for crack was really the 80s and the 90s, and it destroyed and devastated families, many African American families and people of color, low-income folks, devastated their families and their well-being. But it's been a consistent drug since that time. People typically purchase rocks, very small rocks, $10 to $20 a rock. Now, if you are in an urban environment, a big city, then you're likely to pay $10 probably. The further you get from that city, if you're in a rural environment, a small town, then the price is going to go up to maybe 20, even 25, because you have to pay a tax for that person to come to the city, buy the crack cocaine, bring it back to your community, or if you buy the crack cocaine in rural communities, small communities, it's been stepped on a lot, what they call stepped on. It's been mixed a lot so that it's not really a quality drug. The next price, people buy 50s, they buy grams, anywhere from $50 to $75. They buy teeners, 80 to 100, an 8-ball maybe 120, maybe they buy an ounce for 150. The prices are, in a lot of cities, mirror the price of powder cocaine. Some of the street names for crack cocaine are hard because, again, remember, powder cocaine is known as soft. So crack cocaine is known as hard. It's known as work because all the hoppers out on the street that are selling crack cocaine, are working hard, so they call it work. Some people call it butter because if it has a yellow tinge to it, then the purchaser is really interested in purchasing that because that means that it's really good. There's not a lot of cut in it. But of course, people who are wise that sell drugs, they add a little bit of Coca-Cola sometimes to crack cocaine to make it turn slightly yellow so that people believe that it's really a quality drug. So crack cocaine was really popular, and particularly drug dealers would sell crack cocaine. But what happens is the high is so short, 10, 20 minutes, that the person will keep coming back, 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, banging on the drug dealer's door. Heroin is much more popular today because a heroin high can last a few hours, and so drug dealers that go into that business at least get what they would consider a break from some of their customers. In terms of crack cocaine, some people get out there and sell dummies, what they refer to as dummies, and that's fake crack cocaine. And they make that by taking little pieces of soap, bar soap, and selling it. Sometimes people take a mixture of bread and water and some other ingredients and microwave it until it looks like a crack rock, and they sell that to get themselves back in the drug business. The most common way to use crack cocaine, of course, is to smoke it. There are some people that shoot it. Again, those would be the shooters. But you kind of have to break down the crack cocaine with something acidic like Kool-Aid or lemonade to really break it down and be able to snort it. The cut for crack cocaine is most always baking soda. Baking soda makes the crack blow up and kind of makes it look like there's more. So the dealer is very interested in that. Other cuts have been ammonia, 7-Up, baby formula, Miralax, vitamin powder, and of course, fentanyl. So fentanyl is becoming so popular across the U.S. because it's really manufactured fentanyl, not the fentanyl patches. There are fentanyl patches that they give cancer patients and people seriously in pain, but this is a different fentanyl. This is fentanyl that's been manufactured. The chemicals have been developed in a lab or something. The typical user of crack cocaine are still those old school African Americans that have been using it since the epidemic. But there's also a whole new population of younger white people between the ages of maybe 20s and to 40s who are addicted to heroin, who are using crack cocaine again for that speedball. What's used in combination with crack cocaine, not at the same time, but in combination, might be marijuana, might be prescription opiate pills, Xanax, those types of things. And how it's connected to trafficking, it's been an old school drug for women involved in prostitution for a few decades. And so when I was doing street outreach and a lot of case management, you could tell if the crack cocaine was good or if it was bad. If it was bad, that meant that it had a lot of other materials in it, and women weren't getting high as much, and they were gaining weight. And the better the drug was, the more weight the women lost. So you could just look at the women on the street and find out how good the crack cocaine was. And because when you're using crack cocaine and you're getting actual crack cocaine, you tend not to eat, you don't want to eat, you don't need to eat, and so you lose a lot of weight. What you don't see in my experience is a lot of younger drug dealers who use crack cocaine themselves. They might snort powder cocaine if they're at a club or whatever, but you will not see them use a lot of crack cocaine. And I think that goes back to the 80s and 90s decades where we had the crack cocaine epidemic, and they saw what happened to their moms and their grandmoms, and or that information was passed down to them. And so they may recognize that that is a very dangerous drug. And so you might see young drug dealers selling it, but rarely do you see young drug dealers using it. And finally, it's very hard to be a crack user. So people explain the derogatory term crackhead versus crack user. It's you very quickly become addicted to crack cocaine. So there's not really a crack user, somebody who goes to work their job, works Monday through Friday, and then uses crack cocaine on the weekend. That's really not a drug that you can do that with. You become very addicted quickly, and if you did have money, your home, your car, your money quickly leaves, and you become pretty homeless, pretty desperate. And if you hadn't been involved in trading sex for money, items, a place to stay before, you probably likely would do it with a crack cocaine addiction. And then heroin, of course, which is an epidemic right now in the U.S. And it's always amazing to me because I'm old enough to remember when heroin was a problem before. Back in the Vietnam War, and guys were coming back from Vietnam addicted to heroin, and it was horrible. A lot of men died after they served in the war. They died because of heroin overdoses. And so to see that resurface again is heartbreaking. And in a lot of the focus groups that I did, I would ask young people, because it's an epidemic among young people. It's an epidemic among white young people, and particularly working class and middle class young people. And I would ask them, did you know the dangers of heroin? And they would say, no, I didn't know that. Because it really came from, it really sprang out of prescription opiates and that addiction. And I'll talk about that when we get to prescription opiates. But they didn't see the dangers ahead when using heroin, which boggles my mind. But heroin is if we had to rank it 0 to 10, it's definitely a 10 plus plus plus. And there's black tar heroin, white powder heroin, and various colors of powder heroin, from pink, purple, brown. I mean, around the country, dealers have put their particular stamp on heroin so that the customer would know who's selling the heroin. And so you'll see all kinds of colors of heroin. This drug has been consistently an epidemic since it really came back on the scene. And it doesn't seem to be going down anytime soon. So a lot of the users on the street will say that there's really very little heroin in the drugs that you're buying anymore. It's largely fentanyl that's being sold. And what connoisseurs really want is the mixture of heroin and fentanyl, because heroin, that high, lasts much longer than a fentanyl high. But a fentanyl high is much stronger than a heroin high. So if you can get the mixture, then you can get really high for a really long period of time. It's not many people. There's a few people, less people that really want just straight fentanyl, and less amount of people that really want just straight heroin. People know there's a combination. They want that combination. And they know when they buy from the dealer tells them that they're selling them heroin, but they both understand that this is a heroin fentanyl mix. The quality of the heroin across the U.S. varies because it depends on what they're cutting it with, and they cut heroin with everything: baby laxatives, Benefiber, baby formula, powdered sugar, Xanax, basically anything that creates a powder consistency. They'll crush up pills, use tranquilizers, prescription opiates, anything that gets people high or makes the drug dealer lots of money and doesn't get people high. So there's two types of drug dealers. One that mixes it with a bunch of junk because they want to make as much money as possible, and they don't care if they have consistent customers or not. The other drug dealer is trying to make his or her product the very best, so that it almost brings their customers to the brink of death, and then they build a consistent clientele. In some cities, the drug industry is so saturated that when I asked, users will say they have 6 or 7 drug dealers in their phone. And if one doesn't answer, they can always call another one. So not a problem. Plenty of drug users. Testers, particularly with heroin, drug dealers will give out testers to say, try my product. My product is really good. I've heard of people driving down the street with their windows rolled down and a drug dealer, throwing a small tester in their window saying, hey, try my stuff. It's really good. And drug dealers, when they go to jail, they'll give their phone to their cousin or a family member to say, hey, keep my business going, because they don't want to lose customers. It's a competitive business. And even if drug dealers are handing out that fire, like that really good shit, and somebody overdoses, that's not necessarily a bad thing in the drug world. That means you're going to get more customers because they want to come to you because you have that fire. Typically, users will buy a point. It's called a point, 1/10 of a gram. And that might cost $10 to $20, again, depending on if you're urban or rural. And depending on how much it's good, how good it is, will really depend on what you're willing to pay for it. But if you're desperate as well, it's a lot of factors to consider. If you're desperate, that's when the drug dealer can charge a lot and not really give the user a good amount or a good quality. Heroin, the powder, can come in many different forms. It can come in capsules. It can come in folded up pieces of paper. In my community, it comes up in folded lottery tickets. So Toledo is very close to the Michigan border, so we know if it's a red kind of folded up lottery ticket, red and white, we know it's an Ohio drug dealer. If it's a blue one, we know it's a Michigan drug dealer. And some people have preferences about that. Black tar has a sort of sticky consistency, so that's typically placed in a plastic bag or in a piece of foil. And back in the day when McDonald's sold those or gave those remember those long stirs that you used with your coffee, had a little spoon at the end? Well, that's how much a point measures. So you would just go and get one of those spoons. You would measure off flatly off the what's filled in the spoon, and that would be a point, and it would be $10 or $20. Well, McDonald's stopped uh, giving those types of spoons away, I suspect, once they found out what it was used for. And now you just get the flat, long stir that doesn't have a spoon. The other thing that it was being used is when you go in and get the lottery tickets and the scratch offs, and there's a little kind of red thing or blue thing that you might grab. They're free, and you use them to scratch off the ticket, and you put your thumb in it, and that's sort of how you hold it. And that thing where you put your thumb has been used as well to measure drugs. Those are still available, however, though. Oh, and I forgot to tell you about the roses. So you remember those fake roses that they have when you go in convenience stores? If you haven't seen them, notice them next time. But there's a fake rose, and at the end of the rose, it's in sort of a little glass tube, maybe with water, or so that you can put water, or it simulates that it's a real rose. It's those little glass tubes that people take and they throw the rose away and use the glass tube to really smoke their crack cocaine. And so those sell like hotcakes in convenience stores. And, when you look at them, you think, wow, is there like a lot of romantic people? No, there's a lot of people who know what it's really used for. So back to heroin. Most people, of course, shoot heroin. You might, if you had 10 people in the room, 9 of them are going to shoot heroin. The one is probably snorting heroin, but on their way quickly to begin shooting heroin, because shooting heroin just can't compare, what users say, to snorting the drug. And that's what they say. They say, I'm never going to, I'll just snort heroin. It's fine. I'm never going to shoot heroin. And then they find themselves like a week later or a few days later shooting the drug. Users talk about getting their needles from other dealers, and needles might cost $1 a needle or 2 for $5. They might get them at pharmacies that are sort of open and accepting to users that come in, and they know what they're buying them for, but they're willing to sell it to them. So they might get a bag of 10 for $3.95 or $4.99 or something like that. Now, when we talk to users about safety from HIV or hepatitis, almost 100% reported that they did not concern themselves with the prevention of hepatitis or HIV. They were too much in pain, too dope sick to be worried about what might happen sometime in the future. They want to get that drug and they want to get it into their veins as quickly as possible. So yes, they did share needles. They used dirty needles and whatever they could to get that drug ingested into their body as quickly as possible. And that's why you see people overdosed at McDonald's. You see them overdosed in parking lots, because they just don't wait till they get home to use a drug when they're really dope sick and strung out. So some of the prices for heroin, half a gram might be $70 to $90, a gram maybe $120 to $180. Maybe a quarter ounce is $450. Maybe an ounce is up to $900. Again, this is going to vary across the U.S. I just want to give you a general idea. And of course, no one who is drug addicted is buying a half gram or a gram or an ounce. They're buying a point, which is 1/10 of a gram. They're buying enough to not be dope sick and to maybe even get high. But once you're addicted, you're just fighting off. You're just trying not to be dope sick, and you're not necessarily all the time trying to be high. Typical profile of a heroin user today is still white, working class to middle class, although it is quickly creeping into Hispanic population and even less so, but creeping into the African American population. Some of the street names for heroin is boy. I mean, that's a common name. Dope. That's one of the, when young people or addicted people talk to you about being on dope, they're talking about largely heroin. H, some people call it heron. Dog, smack, snoop, wolf, bark. Black tar is known as tar. Powdered heroin might be known as brown, if that's the color, brown sugar. Dog food is a common term for brown colored powder heroin. Some of the drugs that users will mix heroin with, again, powder cocaine, crack cocaine, so they create that speedball effect. Or sometimes heroin users will use heroin and then over time use crack cocaine to come up, or people who are using crack cocaine that have been up for days or using meth that have been up for days will use heroin to bring themselves down so then they could eventually go to sleep. With heroin though, you definitely want to get that nod. You want to get that. Heroin users, they want that kind of real downer feeling, but they might use some uppers just so that they can stay awake and get the benefits of using their drug. Fentanyl is the next drug, and that's really becoming the drug that is involved in almost every other drug. When you ask users about fentanyl, is it decreasing? Is it staying the same? Is it increasing? 100% of drug users and treatment providers and law enforcement are all saying that fentanyl is increasing, and the quality of the drug is 10 plus plus plus. Some of the street names for fentanyl is baby boy, Chinese food, Fenwa, Fetty Wap, which is also a rapper's name. People combine fentanyl use with alcohol and crack cocaine, heroin, weed, powder cocaine, and almost every other drug. And sometimes users aren't even aware that they have ingested fentanyl. They go in drug treatment, they get tested, only to find out that they have fentanyl in their system. Some people do know, a lot of people do not know, and that's what makes the drug so dangerous and contributes to overdose deaths is the fentanyl that's being mixed into all sorts of drugs. So let's move on to prescription opiates, because this is really where the opiate epidemic started. Doctors prescribing prescription opiates to patients in pain. And let me back up and tell you that it all started because the pain management companies started to educate and lobby people about pain, talk to other doctors, talk to the health community about addressing pain. So in 1996, the American Pain Foundation began to urge doctors to address pain. They started talking about the epidemic of pain. And the American Pain Society starts to campaign for pain to be seen as a fifth vital sign. The Federation of State Medical Boards creates a policy that reassures doctors that they will not be punished for responding to pain. And of course, they received $2 million from opiate makers as an incentive. And they used as justification a 1986 paper of a study by Portnoy and Foley. And they had 38 subjects in this study. And they concluded that opiate maintenance therapy can be safe and a more humane alternative to the options of surgery or no treatment in those patients with non-malignant pain and no history of drug abuse. So as long as you didn't have a history of drug abuse, their study said that opiates were safe. Now remember, they only had 38 subjects in their entire study. Dr. Portnoy said that we really have to chase this epidemic of untreated pain, and we have to address pain. And at that time, now he was the president of the American Pain Society, and he worked hard with other people to make sure that pain was included as a fifth vital sign. You know, as you go to the doctor, they have to check the 4 vital signs. They have to check blood pressure, temperature, heartbeat, and breathing every time you go to the doctor. And so now they also have to assess for pain. So in 1998, the Federation of State Medical Boards released a recommended policy reassuring these doctors that they wouldn't face any regulatory action for prescribing large amounts even of narcotics as long as it was in the course of medical treatment. And when doctors were concerned, eventually the Joint Commission became involved, and they published a guide that was sponsored by Purdue Pharma. And it said, quote, "Some clinicians have inaccurate and exaggerated concerns about addiction tolerance and risk of death. This attitude prevails despite the fact that there is no evidence that addiction is a significant issue when persons are given opiates for pain control." As a result, opiates that were in hospitals and only really used post-surgery now flooded doctors' offices across the U.S., and doctors had to treat pain. They had to ask about pain. They had to treat pain, and they began to prescribe prescription opiates. The most popular among the prescription opiates when they first came out was OxyContin. And everyone who became addicted to prescription opiates wanted the biggest dose of prescription opiates they could get, and that was Oxy 80. So everybody wanted to buy Oxy 80 on the street. So you could buy an Oxy 80 for like $30 or $40. Once the pharmaceutical companies found out that people were actually cooking down Oxy 80 and shooting it up in their rigs and their needles, they reconstituted the formula so that it gelled up if you tried to cook it down, and it would jam in your rig. You couldn't shoot it up. When that happened, people flooded over to heroin, and that started off the serious heroin addiction. Now thousands of people, over 16,000 people a year, die of heroin overdose related deaths. The most popular prescription opiate today is Percocets and Roxysets. People want Perc 10s, Perc 20s. They'll settle for Perc 5s, but they have to take a lot of them. Or they like Perc 30. Perc 30 is the favorite among people who still are interested in prescription opiates. Although people think that a Perc 30 is Percocet, it's actually a Roxyset. There are other prescription opiates like Opanas, and Vicodin has now become Norco, and various types of prescription opiates. They're not as popular today because of some of the protections that law enforcement and pharmacy companies and pharmaceutical companies have put in place to make it more difficult for people to doctor shop and for people to steal prescriptions pads and write them and go to all kinds of pharmacies. They kind of have a common computer system that can tell if somebody is doctor shopping or filling a lot of prescriptions across the state, but sometimes not across states. So people that live close to border states can still figure out ways to abuse drugs, but prescription opiates are pretty expensive. So people, it's a lot cheaper to pay $10 or $20 and get a point of heroin than it is to buy these prescription opiates. I mean, if you got a Perc 30, that's going to cost you at least $30, probably a little more. So it's typically $1 a milligram or higher, but certainly not typically lower. So it's pretty expensive to get one Perc 30 when you can go spend $10 or $20 and get heroin mixed with fentanyl, which is going to get you a lot higher than it is with that Perc 30. Some of the common names, there's a variety of names that go along with prescription opiates. But Percocets, might be called Percs. Roxyset might be called Roxys, those types of things. The typical user of prescription opiates are those folks that have not yet caught on to the heroin epidemic. So they're sort of people that are on their way or on the path. And prescription opiate abuse, other than all of the macro level issues that I was talking about, people who were prescribed prescription opiates for legitimate use oftentimes got addicted. People post-surgery, people that had car accidents, people that worked in factories and maybe hurt their shoulder or another body part, were prescribed prescription opiates and legitimately was taking them, but then began to abuse them. They had them in their cabinets, grandparents, parents, And kids would get into those medicine cabinets and start to use prescription opiates, and then to like them and start to steal them from family members, have parties with other young people where they would use prescription opiates. And so that was really the kickoff. Today, it's not as popular. People who might use it are those who don't use heroin yet. Heroin users will use it, but it can't get them as high, but sometimes it can help with the dope sickness. And of course, people use prescription opiates with marijuana, Xanax, and all other types of drugs. Xanax is another sleeper drug that's under sedatives and hypnotics, but the most popular sedative hypnotic has really been Xanax. People love Xanax. Doctors love to prescribe Xanax. The only thing you have to do is go in there and say, I have anxiety, I'm a little anxious, and boom, there's a prescription for Xanax. Because doctors, unfortunately, haven't thought of the fact that people can also abuse Xanax. And so until they go to a workshop or they hear a national cry like they have for the opiate epidemic, they will continue to keep prescribing Xanax and giving it out like candy, which users and abusers use in combination with all of their other drugs. And that makes the heroin epidemic that much more dangerous, because you have heroin, you have fentanyl, and then people are also taking Xanax along with it. Xanax are also known as the forget-me-not drug, because once you do another drug or you drink or you take enough Xanax, you can completely forget what you did and what happened. It will send the user into a blackout fairly quickly. People that use Xanax, they like to just eat them. They don't necessarily crush them down and snort them up. They just eat them, but they typically like to use Xanax with other drugs. Xanax are known as footballs, bars, because of the shape that corresponds with the various milligrams, what the actual pill and tablets look like. Marijuana's a 10 all day long. It's really pretty difficult in some parts of the country to even get the regular weed. Now they call it Reggie, to get regular weed. Now it's all high grade, hydroponic, quality, loud, that fire type of weed. People can purchase a blunt, $10 to $15 of high grade or loud. Comes in a blunt as a cigar of weed, a gram. Sometimes those cigars are the amount of a gram. They can buy a quarter ounce, maybe 100, a half an ounce, maybe 175 to 200, quarter of a pound, 800, maybe a pound, 3,000. Again, marijuana prices can vary though, depending on the quality and the part of the country that you might be in. Today, connoisseurs of marijuana will make or purchase extracts or concentrates that come in oil form or wax form, sort of like the consistency of earwax. And that is a high level of concentrated THC. And that user might take one hit, and that's all they need. It's also referred to by the name dabs. And regular weed might be known as mids, sort of a mid-grade level marijuana. Methamphetamine is sporadic. It's either a 10 in some communities or really low in some communities. In my community, rural areas, meth is off the chain. In big cities, meth is also off the chain, but it's still sporadic around the country. There are two types of methamphetamine. Bottle dope or shake and bake or dirty meth, they refer to it, and that can be made in a 2-liter pop bottle. People make it as they're driving. People make it in their homes or in their garages, and it's not as, I guess, clean as crystal meth or what people refer to as ice. But when you're making bottle dope, people in these communities, in these families, have recipes, and they pass down the recipes among the family. A lot of times when you're making bottle dope, you're making it to use among yourself, your friends, or your family. You're not really into hardcore drug dealing. you want to make it so that you can then consume it. You can typically make bottle dope in about 30 minutes, but crystal meth is on a whole different level. When people say that methamphetamine or bottle dope or shake and bake is good in terms of quality, then crystal meth is times 10. That takes a lot more work to make crystal meth. It's a lot more dangerous, can blow up. Of course, the other one is dangerous as well, but when you're making crystal meth, you really need almost a makeshift lab to be able to make this crystal meth. And they call it crystal because it comes, when it's all said and done, it looks like shards, like little tiny shards of glass almost, depending on the cook. Users would typically purchase 1/10 of a gram or a point for $20, or that's of the powdered meth. Crystal meth, they might purchase as much as a gram for up to $160, something around that price range. Typical meth users are known as meth heads, tweakers. Other users might be heroin users that are looking to speedball, so they want to put that methamphetamine straight into the needle with heroin and shoot it up at the same time. Some of the names, of course, for methamphetamine is meth, speed, shake and bake. Crystal meth is referred to as ice. And users might combine meth with a whole host of, typically not another upper, but they might combine meth with any of the other downer type drugs. Other drugs that people abuse are prescription stimulants like Adderall. Adderall is a favorite among drug users. Street names are Addy. They don't really cost a lot of money because it's typically a drug that younger people, maybe high school age young people, will use, and they'll just trade them or give them to each other. Ecstasy and Molly, another drug. Ecstasy is typically a pill. Molly is typically powder, although there's currently a lot of fentanyl being put into ecstasy and Molly. And sometimes it's all fentanyl, and sometimes people are pressing their own pills and calling it ecstasy and selling it under the guise of ecstasy. With ecstasy, the price really corresponds with what kind of dosage you're getting, whether it's a single stack, they call it, a double stack, or a triple stack. And the price will correspond with that. Might be $10, $20, $30, or in some cities, $20, $30, $40, something like that. Molly, you can buy up to a gram, maybe between $40 and $60, or maybe up to $75. Ecstasy and Molly is a social drug. That's what you typically use when you go to the club, or you're going to a festival, or you're going to see bands. It's really sort of the hippie drug. Some drug dealers will use Molly or an ecstasy as part of their repertoire drug use. A new drug on the scene is kratom. And kratom has recently cropped up on the scene, and it's been in other countries, but people are picking up on it in the U.S. And kratom, users will put it in tea and they'll drink it. Some people will use it to kind of stave off their cravings for heroin, but medicinally, the jury's still out on whether kratom is helpful or not. We do know that people have began to abuse kratom and replace heroin with kratom, but end up in the same place, only with a kratom addiction instead of a heroin addiction. So it can be tricky. People don't know a lot about it yet, but users do order it internationally and get it in and typically use it in their tea. There's K2, which is synthetic marijuana. You smoke it just like marijuana. Typically you buy it from dealers, convenience stores, those types of things. True marijuana users don't typically like K2 or use K2 because it has a lot of chemicals in it, and people don't who are marijuana smokers or traditional marijuana smokers don't really want to get into the chemicals. People that use K2 are typically users that want to pass a drug screening test. They want to keep a job. And so they'll use K2. I haven't seen a lot of people that really love K2. They use it out of necessity because they want to alter their consciousness, but they also don't want to lose a job or get arrested or violate their probation. Promethazine is a drug referred to as lean, and you hear it in rap songs. You hear rappers talk about lean. It's a cough syrup, highly potent cough syrup that is a really downer type. So typical users might be rappers and young drug dealers, but it's fairly it's not prevalent among users across the board. It's sort of a niche drug that some people will use. Other drugs like bath salts, I think, was hot and heavy for a while, but I think that is now waning because of all the reports, tragedy. Drug users are tending to shy away from bath salts now, but there are plenty of other drugs that they are moving toward, which is heroin, fentanyl, those types of things. Other drugs on the scene, Flocka, Crocodile, those things we aren't going to talk about just yet, but it's good to have a good working knowledge from the street perspective on, some of the street names, some of the prices, how users are using the drugs, and what they're mixing in with the drugs. It's good to have a good working knowledge when you are trying to be a good and effective advocate in not only the trafficking world, but any other social justice advocacy. In trafficking, heroin has come on the scene in a major way. Not only heroin, but fentanyl, Xanax, prescription opiates. All of these are major players among victims and survivors who get caught up in not only sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And I promised I'd talk just a moment about labor trafficking and exploitation. There have been reports of people being convinced and manipulated to work for others, whether it's magazine sales or working factories or in the fields, and being paid off in drugs instead of money, with the idea of getting you addicted to drugs and then furthering the exploitation into trafficking experiences. And so there have been a few reports of those across the country. But we know a lot more about sex trafficking and drug use and abuse than we do about labor trafficking. We just know in general a whole lot about sex trafficking, more than we do about labor trafficking. So that's your education on drugs. Thank you for allowing me to educate you. Never be tricked into saying you're finished with your education, because that would mean you stop growing. Education breeds confidence, and a confident advocate is a hopeful advocate, and a hopeful advocate will create change. Like Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And Edward Everett said, education is a better safeguard of liberty than a standing army. Until next time, nation, the fight continues. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe.